Hi, hello, welcome to a brand new episode of Argumentor, the podcast stage to discuss, deliberate, and debate on various contemporary social, legal, and political issues. So, as the very name suggests, this is a platform to adduce various arguments and counter the same by reflecting on different perspectives we all have. So, guys, I was actually thinking, or out of our discussions we had, like what actually went wrong, because Galvan Valley crisis was one of the biggest ever crises that had happened at the Himalayan border between India and China ever after 1962 war. So even though India being a part, or India being in India taking an initiative, so many diplomatic relationships or whatever relation we had between the two leaders of the two countries, what do you think would have gone wrong in case of the diplomacy? Minhaj, you want to try?
Yeah, I mean, the question you've raised is very pertinent because, yeah, India and China have had many informal and formal discussions like the WNCC meetings. And in 1993, there was an agreement signed to maintain peace and tranquility. And even Article 1 of that particular document states that no country should do anything to destroy the peace and tranquility that exists between the line of actual control. And I mean, the fact that 20 soldiers were martyred is very disheartening to know, because when there is a document that provides for negotiation, that provides for peace and tranquility, why does one country or the other try to infringe that? And yeah, like you said, that is exactly what went wrong. It it's not There's no point pointing fingers at China or pointing fingers at India and saying, oh, we did this, oh, we did that. It all depends on why two countries could not respect a document that was signed between them and honor their bilateral relations.
Exactly.
Something like you can this made a little controversial, but then you can attribute this to Article 370, because when the Article 370 was abrogated, you had what we had: the Chinese occupied territory, or the illegally occupied territory of China, and the Pakistan occupied territory. We had tried to assimilate them or tried to include them into our Indian map. So then we said that as standard by Article 370, now Kashmir will have the same constitution as us and the same flag as us, and also to we divided the two territories. So it might have caused little apprehension with China and also especially with Pakistan today, like as of last year, that if India can also put a step forward with regard to Article 370, and many parts of Kashmir, or let's say some parts of Kashmir, are divided or are captured by these two forces, China and Pakistan. So now the Article 370 completely dismisses these two powers or these two states. So can you say that was it a fault of India with regard to the same, because we did a step there, because though it is actually a very good step in trying to bring bring the entire state into the mainstream India, was it a step which also provoked these two countries, especially China? The provocation of Pakistan is immaterial as of now, I feel, because we have held millions of talks. We have held talks after talks, but then they backstab us. The same with China, but then do you think that they were provoked because of Article 370 also? Because there was an opinion regarding the same.
Well,
Joel,
I don't think I completely agree.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mario.
No, Minhaj, you can actually bring your contention there, peaceful.
Yeah, well, I don't think I completely agree with you, because after the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, the control over the borders there and all the affairs that happened in Kashmir, which is now the Union Territory, has gone to New Delhi, and which has stronger power, which has stronger enforcement abilities, and therefore it would help keep these external forces at bay. And in my opinion, I welcome the move, as it sort of reduces the chances of external forces taking advantage of that autonomy of Kashmir, which was prevalent when Article 370 was in full force.
Like Minhaj again. So here my point is quite, adhering halfly to what Joel said and halfly to what Minhaj said, because China definitely being a neighbor can actually consider this change that had been taken by India not as a provocation. So there is no option for them to take it as a provocation, but while the existing the number of issues, the number of issues that actually prevailed in the border, this acted as a provocation in front of China. So that's why a person who takes up in a diplomatic perspective might find this to be to have been a provocation or not, because when the control gets and also so provocations, if we are actually numbering them one by one, there had been equal number from both the sides. The troops that have been moved to Delhi, focusing completely on the region near Delhi, and Indian troops moving to the same, and even from the part of China, even the alteration in maps undertaken, all these are ultimately creating provocations on both sides. But I don't think the abrogation of Article 370 had should have ended up as a provocation on the part of China, if I am asked the same question.
Yeah, I agree with both of it. A great move of trying to abrogate it, because we're trying to assimilate Kashmir into our regular society. But it, according to me, and there were a few articles. I'd like to recommend you a few articles also with regard to the same. But then, because we term it as a historic, the government termed it as a historic move that Article 370 now since it has been abrogated. Kashmir would now have more development and and things like that. But also, yes, it also tried to, you can say it tried to remove the monopoly of the leaders there in Kashmir, because like you had some of the leaders who tried to take advantage of it, because only in the case of defense and communication and things like that, only India had, like India could say anything, but then the rest was followed, like Kashmir followed the Kashmir constitution. So that with concern too, I completely agree that it was a good move. Pakistan considers their new map as a historic move, the entire of Kashmir and parts of Ladakh and also Junagadh as part of the territory, because we all know that Junagadh in our history textbooks is that the people of Junagadh wanted to stay in India, but the Nawab of Junagadh wanted to stay with Pakistan. But then in the end, we got Junagadh to our side. So right now, I don't know, because each country is trying to bring back the historical norms, because I don't know, a little confusing on that aspect. You have anything to say, any of you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the question you raise is very, very, very relevant, but not losing sight of the argument we have in hand today. What do you think would be a plausible solution in order to settle the dispute between India and China? Do you think there is a possible solution, or do you feel like the only outcome of this is war or Cold War or trade war or economic war like is going on right now?
Yeah, so Minhaaj, that's a very, very pertinent question. I mean, the whole India wants to know an answer for that question, because definitely the only ideal solution, I call it ideal because there are definitely several lacunas that we face that erode the entire intention of the solution of diplomacy. Even as I had pointed before, initiation has been undertaken by India. However, why the same thing failed? So as you have said, in case of deciding upon a Cold War or deciding upon an economic war or even a hot war, ultimately we have to understand who gets benefited and who is in trouble, because at this point of a pandemic situation, almost all the countries that are severely backlashed by the pandemic, I mean including the United States. So being in a very economically weak or a meek state, if we actually plan, or with all those nuclear planning, including the nuclear planning, like similar to the ones that have been undertaken near the PLA rocket base. I mean, the major decision of nuclear defense mechanism has been set up in the PLA rocket base. So if all these initiation of a Cold War or hot war actually can result in, pushing both the nations into greater troubles, greater economic backlashes, because none of us are in a position to actually do it. So the only possible solution we have in front of us, one is the intervention of the United Nations into it. Otherwise, like India has actually initiated, the number of diplomatic forces entering into both the nations, obviously, because we are not at all, none of the countries, I mean, the whole world is not at all in a state to initiate a war of that sort. So I think the only possible solution we have in front of us is diplomacy. So what do you guys actually infer from the same?
I agree on your point of diplomacy. Then we have been holding talks as of late also. Then are they going in the right way? Like, are we reaching a final solution? Because student alone, I cannot have my own solutions or anything because I'm just a student. But then someone who's a diplomat has a more varied idea about it and how to deal with it. Then, as we all know, we can point India as a country can point out the conditions of the Uyghur Muslims in China. Now, the reason why I say is the Uyghur Muslims in China is because the Chinese have been putting them in detention camps and trying to educate them. I'm double quoting educate them because there have been a lot of violations done on them by the Chinese. Because you know what, China is also putting pressure on the UN and trying to raise the entire Kashmir issue with regard to human rights violation. But then they do not find they do not find the issue in their own country. As a country, like there are some opinions with regard to the same as to the entire pandemic also is happening, and also since China's pressurizing on other countries like India, and also not just India, even several countries in several other Asian countries also with regard to the South China Sea and things like that, and that One Belt, One Road initiative and things like that, we can maybe pressurize on the condition of the Uyghur Muslims because they are very sensitive. Because you know that Chinese literally control the media. There's no freedom of speech or things like that. So then there's very restricting information about them. But then that there's huge amount of violations being done on them. So then if you raise a situation like that, and since they're already pressurized, they might try to find steps. I don't know. I'm still too young to do it. I'm still too inexperienced. But then my opinion also might be very, very, very ridiculous also. But then, yeah, pointing out the violations in their own country can also, because it causes a shame to the country itself, because they are very open to the outside world. Anything on that?
Well, yeah, if you look at it that way, then many countries, including countries from the West and the East, Asia, countries all over the world have pointed their fingers at China for being responsible for this current pandemic we're faced with. And in my opinion, I don't see any pressure that's being created on the Chinese government. So do you think pointing out what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims will act as a pressure for them to resolve the border crisis between India and China? In my opinion, I don't think so. Well, while researching, I came across this
since they are pointing out about human rights violations in Kashmir, and they're trying to give it behind, they're standing beside Pakistan. So won't it be a ideal solution of them of us trying to point out the situation of the Uyghur Muslims? Because,
well, in my opinion, diplomacy is our only hope. Regardless of how many countries are involved and who facilitates the negotiation, diplomacy is the beginning and end to this problem. And while researching, like I said, I came across this very interesting solution to this crisis and this conflict that India and China are faced with. So there is an environmental science professor called Maharaj Pandit, who's at the University of Delhi, and he proposes a very interesting solution to this current problem. So what he says is that maybe this problem, through diplomacy, of course, could be resolved when the entire Trans-Himalaya and the LAC is converted to a natural reserve, or made into a natural reserve and in the form of a demilitarized zone, like what exists between North Korea and South Korea. The entire demilitarized zone is in fact declared as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it serves as a protection for many endemic species that are prevalent in that demilitarized zone. So do you think that would be a plausible solution for the LAC crisis?
I am really much, impressed and surprised by that idea that has been put forth, because that's one of a very thought-provoking ideas towards the diplomacy. I mean, about diplomacy, because the plausibility of diplomacy or the ideal nature of diplomacy is still in question. But however, Minhaaj, don't you think that even if this happens, or even if it gets converted to a demilitarized natural reserve. So won't there be violations happening like what that had been happening since the past? Because we had number of peace and tranquility agreements, and they're often getting violated in this manner. So similarly, won't the same happen? Because nobody's having an enforceable force. Even the United Nations do not have an enforcing authority over any of these nations. So don't you think similar violations will happen even if we make this into a reality?
Again, I completely agree with you. The solution I proposed and came across was only an idea on how they could possibly resolve this crisis. And also, if you think about it, the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea is started with mines, and that won't be a problem here because this is a very high altitude region, and the extreme weather could pose as a hindrance to troop movement, etc. Well, again, I would like to reinstate that diplomacy is the only solution, and regardless of any agreement or any understanding both the countries come to, it only depends on whether they respect that agreement or not. So it completely depends on the effectiveness of our and the Chinese diplomacy and the government machinery as well.
Yes, Minhaj. So Joel, do you have a say on this?
So there have been some successful diplomatic stands by the country. Example, Kailash Mansarovar, if I'm not wrong, is in China. Like they have opened it up for the devotees to go to Kailash Mansarovar for their pilgrimage, and yeah, that's and also I think one of the biggest traders in of their goods is India, because India literally, like, we have a huge trade deficit, put a lot of goods from China especially. So they don't want to let go of us on an economic stand because majority of us are using the Chinese goods. So then they won't try to do in a more aggressive manner. But then I guess they are also being pressurized in a way because they are pressurized by they're pressurized by all the countries, especially with regard to the COVID situation, because how dismal and how unthoughtful of them to really cause this kind of havoc among the other countries. And B, there seems to be conflicting interests also within the country. And C, yeah, let's point out the Hong Kong issue. Why are we forgetting about Hong Kong, especially with regard to the new national security law which the Chinese have passed? Like like we can also point out, like, see, I completely agree on diplomatic and we should not promote war, because war causes ultimate damage, collateral damage, and it might help in one country, but then rebuilding the entire state will take huge amounts of money. And the thing, war is the final solution. If not, war should not be a solution. But then, if a solution, it should be the final solution. But then, on a diplomatic standpoint, I would say that we need to really point out violations also for like especially in Hong Kong and in Uyghur and the Uyghur Muslims. That's what I feel. Because but also understand the fact that they also pressurize within the country. There may be other measures also on the same.
So
well, yeah, that's very well pointed out.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Maria, you had to say something.
No, Minhaj, continue. You can continue.
No, I completely concur with Joel because they have been facing a lot of pressure from within their own country. And with respect to the Hong Kong situation, things look very, I would say, very bad for them in the current situation. But keeping this discussion solely to what India has to do, I feel like it just depends on the efficiency of our diplomacy with the Chinese people.
True, Minhaj. So even if when we say about the impracticability, or though we say the implausibility of all these happenings, there were successful talks that had actually reduced the extreme strain of the situation there, like the series of India-China standoffs, where like technically witnessed, alternate deliberations also taking place that were regarding the reaffirmation that actually the disengagement from LAC was out of the deliberations that had happened within the military commanders. So we can never deny the fact that the nations within themselves had worked, the military commandos had actually worked towards bringing up, a diplomatic channels within themselves, rather than involving countries apart from themselves. So I think nations within themselves, military commanders within themselves, can actually think of disengagements, can definitely bring up diplomatic channels within them or employed within them, so that the entire situation can be changed. I personally believe that these sort of technical deliberations, these sort of disengagements can actually stop a war from happening, especially a situation like this. So that's what I think. To a point, diplomacy can actually work if it gets feasible within these military commanders, if I'm not wrong. So do you think that we have actually almost, from our perspective, from our side, within our limitation, has reached a solution towards the current issue that we actually face?
Yeah, diplomacy is at its peak. And what as a country we should do? First thing, stop. We need to really show what is really happening to our citizens, because we need to hold the government. A government should be accountable to the citizens. We can we need to stop selling nationalism, because yes, we have, everyone has their own pride towards their own country. Then nationalism in the practical sense, because if you keep on preaching about nationalism and don't protect the sovereignty of our own country, it completely goes way opposite, way tuned. So I'd like to actually quote Rabindranath Tagore. He once stated also that this nationalism is a cruel epidemic of evil that is sweeping over human world at the present age, eating into its moral vitality. Today, if he was if he was there in our society, he would be called an anti-national for sure. But then in the country also want their answers, but then they're not getting the answers as well. Like, yeah, we shouldn't pressurize our army. The media is now remaining, like, as I pointed out, the media should be giving out on what's really happening, instead of trying to instead of trying to cover something else.
I agree to you, Joel, almost 100% of what you said, because definitely media has a role to play right away. We're not trying to deviate from the topic, but it's very much important that the media doesn't end up, conducting a trial in themselves, such that the wrong information is passed to the people, or in support of a particular majority, or anybody of that sort. So even in the case of the issues that had come up with the border, what people receive, or what a person, a viewer receives, exactly what the media tries to cover. So if they begin to almost peep into almost every single security issues and so on, that can definitely affect the relationship with our country with China, like the recent news report stated. And one more thing I would like to state, that the possibility of diplomacy, like what Minaj had rightly pointed out, the restoration of bilateral and ambassadorial relationships since 1976 had been going really well in India. I mean, the major setback we only suffered was in 1962, but later almost the bilateral relationship was intact and proper to a greater extent. So I think we still have a scope, we still have hope and scope to ensure that no Cold War or hot war actually breaks out, or even an economic war breaks out, until and unless it is for the security reasons of the nation. So I think we have almost covered up the solutions that we tended to say. And if you guys would like to add on to the solutions that we had raised to as of now.
Well, in the light of the arguments that the three of us have made, and our viewpoints and our suggestions that we feel both the countries should take into consideration, I think all three of us can agree that diplomacy is the only solution to this problem. And of course, sort of pressurizing the government to take a stand and not let our country's head hang in shame should be the way out of this.
Yeah, completely.
Well,
Yes,
I thank you all for...
Thank you so much for listening to us. Yeah. Have a great time.